So what should the Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, focus on when it comes to tax reform? Former Texas Congressman and host of the Ron Paul Liberty Report, Dr. Ron Paul, joins me now. Dr. Paul, welcome back.
Thank you very much. Good to be with you.
Now, do you agree that tax reform is incredibly necessary right now?
Yes, I do. And I was optimistic that we would get some good news, but to tell you the truth, I was very disappointed. I thought a major reform would be to call for the repeal of the 16th Amendment, and it never came. So I'm not all that optimistic about what's happening, because he did not talk about the term revenue neutral, but he really implied that they would. In order to give tax cuts for a few people, we have to raise taxes on somebody else because they've had deductions, and it's more economic management, economic planning through the tax code that they're doing. But lower rates, yes. But the other thing that is never mentioned, because taxes are different than spending, but if you really wanted reduction in taxes, you have to talk about cutting spending. And that means that we have to deal with the role of government, and the role of government is out of control in all ways, whether it's foreign spending or domestic spending. And the role of government has nothing to do with our Constitution anymore, so therefore the tax code will remain very oppressive.
Yeah, and oftentimes these tax cuts rely on this theoretical and magical economic growth, which we haven't seen and we're not creating the environment for. But the idea is, if you cut taxes and you incentivize businesses to come back, we'll have so much GDP growth that there will be an even bigger tax base, so we can keep spending the way we have been spending. But that model is unsustainable as well, isn't it?
Absolutely, and it's the wrong incentive. That shouldn't be the incentive, to sneak in an increase in revenue, enhanced revenues coming in. If it did work, and maybe there could be some examples pointed out, but it's merely to pay for government. So if you happen to have gotten some extra revenues in, great, cut more spending. But there's no talk of that. That's not part of what's going on. They want to maintain and believe that they can maintain the welfare warfare state and never really pay for it, and that's the fallacy. So you can't really adjust taxes to deal with that problem. It's structural, it's philosophic, it's anti-constitutional, and but he did mention less regulations, and that is good, and less complicated tax codes. Yes, that is good. But the revenue neutral stuff and hoping for economic growth to pay for these bills, it's a dream.
It is absolutely a dream, and it's just shifting the tax burden and turning us into Greece. Where would you like to see Republicans start? And do you think there is hope of something like a flat tax, which is obviously more than simplifying a few brackets?
No, I don't think it'll happen. There's too many oxes to be gored if you did that. But I remember my first speech I ever gave in politics in 1974, and I said, well, the tax code ought to be simplified. Maybe we could get by with a 10% tax, never higher. The churches don't ask for more than 10%. The government's total should never get 10% of our earnings, which is now I've agreed that might be too much if you really want limited government. But no, a flat tax might offer some things, but it's not going to happen. There's too many deductions. There'll always be exemption. So this was what Ryan was talking about, was flattening the tax code a little bit. But then he said, except for this, and you'd have to cut that out. And so I don't think that is it. That still avoids the problems. It might be that you could get lower tax revenues and a simplified tax code, and I think that's what Steve Forbes has argued for. But overall, I think it's a spending issue and a role of government issue, and our Constitution is the problem. So this is not going to solve the problem. But, some people say instead of the flat tax, you should have a sales tax. But once again, no matter what the reforms are, you have to talk about spending. That was one of the reasons I never endorsed, either one. Not that if it provided an opportunity to lower taxes, I would have supported it. But I didn't want to get away from tinkering with the tax code, thinking it's going to deal with structural problems, which are much more important.
No, ultimately, that's not the goal, to lower taxes, because you absolutely would have to lower spending. It's finding a new way of taxing, so it seems like they're lower. So in the end, it's all a charade, but hopefully society will benefit somehow. Dr. Paul, thank you so much for your insight.